Successful meetings and ultimately successful collaborations are about people, first and foremost. When you can't have everybody in the same room with you, it's important to be able to see them, to be able to interact with them, along with the information that you're working on. The only way that we could make it happen every day is to use GoToMeeting.
I'm Michael Parrish-Dudell, entrepreneur, speaker, and best-selling author of Shark Tank Jumpstart Your Business. This is a show about discovery, about showcasing the next generation of business and media influencers. It's new, it's now, it's the next crop.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Next Crop. I'm Michael Parrish-Dudell. My guest today is Tarek Pertew, the co-founder of Wakefield and the creator of the Uncubed conference. Hey Tarek, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Wakefield versus Uncubed. Why don't you explain what the businesses are both and then how they sort of play into each other?
Yeah, sure. So what Wakefield does as a whole, Wakefield Media is the entity that holds Wakefield and Uncubed, essentially. And we connect people to next generation companies. So there's thousands of companies out there growing, gaining traction, working on interesting things, and people have no idea who they are. So it's our mission to solve that problem through content. And we do it digitally through Wakefield, which is our daily email subscription, and the Uncubed conference, which is a creative gathering of hiring startups to connect them with the world, and or with our attendees. And we just launched a job board, so if you want to go and see all the hiring startups in New York, for instance, you'd visit there.
So at the very core of your business is this idea of curation and curating great opportunities, curating great media, great content. As the web becomes louder and a little bit more saturated, do you think curation is sort of the future of where we're going?
Yeah, I think curation's probably always been important to people. Just people like to be told what's good, what to do. I'd rather you tell me than read an instruction manual, or you tell me the top 10 apps that you use instead of me having to go dig around and find it. So yeah. Any level of curation is always important, and today in particular, especially when anything that's hot and sort of in vogue, which the tech world is right now, there's like 1,000 tech events in New York every day. If you subscribe to any of the tech event lists or blogs, for instance, you're seeing like just a shitload of them. And so we'll pick our two favorites, for instance, and then when it comes to like the noise of all the companies out there that are hopefully growing, of course the majority of them are not, and they're failing, but we go in and we pick out the ones that we think are the most exciting, and we cover them, and I think that is always going to be something very important for people. Curation will, of course, get more and more important as people flood into the market with new information.
And the challenge, I think, for curation is that you really have to gain that trust before people look to you as that source. How have you done that? How has Wakefield gained the trust? How has Uncubed done that?
Yeah, so some of it was premeditated and others just comes along the way, but to develop an authority in a space is what helps you be a sort of an authority to curate. The events really help with that. You know, we now run the largest gathering of hiring startups, you know, in the nation. We are also in Berlin and London, and we can speak at least to say, you know, when it comes to hiring startups, nobody knows more than us. Why? Well, we run the largest conference, you know, or the largest conference series in the world for hiring startups, and we've spent 2 years and thousands of issues covering emerging companies every single day. And like anything, if you want to develop an authority in a space, or if you want to actually be trusted, you have to put work in. You know, right out the gates, you know, the week that we launched our Uncubed event page, the first one, for instance, and the first week of our issues in Wakefield, we weren't an authority yet. 2 years later, it's a lot of work goes into it, and now people trust us.
So you just said, I mean, you really are an authority when it comes to startups, tech startups, just to startups in general.
Yeah.
I love startups and I love startup culture, but my struggle is that I feel like a lot of times startups don't spend as much time thinking about actually being a business. There's no road to profit. There's all these companies that exist that maybe have users, but I just don't see a business model there. And as somebody who's interested in that, that's frightening because we're creating all of these companies that's not making any money. And that's what, I mean, business is about a lot of things, but making money is a part of it. Right. Do you feel like we are, I don't want to use the word epidemic, but are we in a situation where companies are thinking about growth in the wrong ways?
You know, I think the interesting thing here is how much we look to our mentors for guidance in terms of what we're building. And so what we've learned when we launch these conferences in different markets, we partner often with sort of the local authorities in the space, right? So the WeWorks of the world and in whatever location they're in, or Rocket Space in San Francisco, 1871 Chicago, people that really have their ear to the ground and people that know the scene well. And then of course, by studying the companies, we get an idea of what they're working on. And one thing that what we saw is that different markets approach the creation of business differently. Chicago businesses that hatched, for instance, have a little bit more of a business model tied to it. So if you're an investor that really wants to see people that are revenue generating businesses, or they've got at least a plan for it. Chicago tends to be a decent market for it. New York, a little 50-50. San Francisco, as we all know in the Valley, is hyper user growth over anything else. And I think the mentors in that space, the Paul Grahams of the world and others, I believe, I don't want to misquote him, but speak so importantly to get the users, you'll figure out the model later. I think that works for some companies, as we've seen, but as like a holistic approach for young people emerging, coming into the space, there's actually nothing better than building a business that you can start churning revenue from day one if you want to be sustainable, if you want to actually grow a business.
Here's my concern is that you have all of these venture capitalists, angel investors who say, listen, don't worry about cash, we have that covered, you build the user base. Well, of course they're going to say that because then they have a larger stake in the company and that makes sense for them. So I worry sometimes that the people who are giving the advice maybe are a little biased because they're the ones who, so when I hear that, I hear user. I think you have to walk the line, and it's always a struggle to figure out which is more important and which you should do first. So I think you bring up a good point. Really you're expert, besides just opportunities, you're an expert in sort of hiring and matching, because that's really important, matching the right opportunity with the right person. I know all of these great startups that are looking for cool people. I know all of these cool people that are looking for great startups, but there seems to be a chasm between the two. And I know that's a challenge you're trying to solve. But why do you think that disconnect exists? Are there just too many companies out there? What's the struggle?
It's very much the institution that we live in. So much of the career discovery process begins when you're in college, and colleges have categorically have no clue what they're doing when it comes to connecting their audience with emerging companies. They just don't. It's not in their best interest. In fact, I was just down at UVA, my alma mater, having this discussion because they're as guilty as everybody else when it comes to funneling everybody into banking and consulting and the traditional careers, because they go make their high salary, they turn around and they hand a paycheck to the school, or at least that's what they want. And funneling people into no-name startups is risky. It might not turn that money in the short term and all that. So I think it starts with the institution that we're in, and that begins most heavily with the education space. Couple that with mom and dad who are still of the, I feel like our parents were in the worst, they're the worst generation, because they're the ones where it was like, go make a paycheck, your work doesn't have to be important to you, you need to raise your family, move to the burbs, and that is what life should be for you. And so we've all accepted this work is an obligation mentality that our parents have passed on to us, the schools continue to force on us. And so all these really exciting young modern work opportunities that are coming out, the institution hasn't allowed for it to really be easily discoverable. And one quick addition to that is startups aren't going to colleges and recruiting. They're not. They don't have the bandwidth or whatever. They're not recruiting on Monster and everywhere else because they don't have the brand recognition that would get people's interest in it. So they have to do it through executive search. They have to do it through referrals and all these other things. And so that's where we come in and see a massive market opportunity is we know what your needs are. We're going to be a voice for you both with Uncubed and Wakefield. And we know that we can go reach the students and people that are disgruntled with their jobs or disenchanted by their current jobs. And it's going to be a long, hard road as it has been already. But we see the opportunity there.
Yeah. So acquiring talent is one thing, but keeping that talent, maintaining that talent is a whole nother bag of, what is it, bag of worms, can of worms? Yeah, a bag of worms would be something very different than a can of worms. It's a whole nother
It's a bag of worms.
It's a bag of worms. Yeah. That's a new thing we're going to say. It's a bag of worms. So how do you maintain? Is it through culture? Because I happen to think that culture now is perhaps more important than it ever has been.
Right.
What's your relationship with creating great cultures, and how do you think that culture should be expressed today?
Yeah, so the greatest thing about culture is that it's unique to each respective company, and what culture is not, and I know I'm saying the same stuff that a lot of people say, it's not about the yoga balls and the free coffee and all that stuff that makes an environment nice. It's about the mission, it's about the drive from the leadership down, are we all sharing on a big project together? So if you want to keep your employees, the key is to have a happy and innovative and challenging work environment. That's critical. So if you can bring people in every day and they're like, this is a problem Tarek, I share this with you, I want to solve this problem with you, and then creating a work environment that's challenging but enjoyable and everyone has mutual respect, then you're creating an atmosphere in which people don't want to leave. Now, we also live in a world where people are like, I expect to, you always hear people say, we live in a world where people will stay at a company for 2, maybe 3 years and move on. That's fact. I think that's just the progression of
and
people.
we need to accept that as...
Part of us needs to accept it and maybe be flattered by the fact that we can take people, like Google's done so well, take people, make them deadly in what they do, and then they move on to be better professionals elsewhere where they take a more senior position at a company and help it grow. And so we can be flattered by that. Let's just hope they don't leave too soon in our growth because we need them there. And that's our job to keep them happy and keep them in place.
So for somebody who's looking for a good opportunity, they go to the Uncubed conference, they're trying to meet maybe a great startup, they're trying to sort of build their network, and let's say they go there and they try some of these traditional networking tools, maybe schmoozing. this day and age, especially in the startup world, you're never going to get very far using those. What do you define as good networking?
So I stumbled on what I think to be a pretty good trick, and you come up in this trick for me. Okay. When people ask what's the best way of getting a job, you know, and to me it's just meeting people. Be out there, be meeting people, be networking, you know, because the more people you know, the more like you're scaling your opportunities, right? So these are my opportunities I create for myself, and these are opportunities created by other people that you know or that you've met with. But I learned that there's a big difference between walking into an event with a bunch of people and networking, where you don't know anybody, and then walking into an event where you know one or two people and networking. And I was at an event recently where I thought you were going to be at for some strange reason, and I didn't know anybody, and it sucked because I was like, God, I don't want to be the guy that has to walk up and say, hey, I'm Tarek, the co-founder of Wakefield. Have you heard of it? No. Well, let me tell you, it's really cool. And everyone's just like, that's cool, you know, awesome. Whereas if you and I are in the same room together and you have, let's say, you know 2 or 3 other people there, you'll walk up and say, I really want to introduce you to Tarek, co-founder of Wakefield. Are you not familiar with it? Oh, you have to know it. I mean, so many people read it. Or have you not been to Uncubed? You have to go. It's one of the best conferences ever. You can say that. Yeah. I can't. So my trick to networking is if you're going to go to a networking event, be choosy with it and try to go to one where you know somebody who knows other people at that event. Yeah. Because then you at least are going to have 1 or 2 really good introductions to people that you don't already know, as opposed to the whole cold calling approach. So treat networking like you would treat sales, I guess. Know somebody before you try to go reach out.
That's great advice. Tarek, thank you so much for being here. My guest today has been Tarek Pertew. He is the co-founder of Wakefield and the creator of the Uncubed conference. You can find out more at getwakefield.com, or you can follow him on Twitter at TarekP. And don't forget, if you liked today's episode, stick around for 5 minutes more. You can find all of that at thenextcrop.com/more. It's 5 minutes, totally free, extra content. We're going to be talking about what you need to know if you're an employer and you want to hire a great person, or if you're looking for a job and you want to find a great company. Again, that's at thenextcrop.com/more. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week.